All right. Welcome to the County Commissioners Board Work Session for August 20th, 2020. And it is the 20th, yes. And if you would like to join us via conference call, the phone number is 360-252-9020, and the PIN is 1234. This hour-long work session is on budget. So it's going to be very informational for all of us. I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board. Also present is Vice Chair Commissioner Ty Menser. In the boardroom is Commissioner Gary Edwards, along with County Manager Ramiro Chavez and Megan Porter, our PIO. We also have Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell, and we have Denise Doty, Patty Risotto, and Olivia Outman. Welcome, and you want to start this off, Ramiro?
Yes, Commissioner. Thank you, and good morning. This work session is going to be really having a conversation with the board related to the annual versus biennial budgets. You had a little bit of information yesterday related to the survey that we conducted, as well as you heard comments from your fellow elected officials related to this matter again. So at this point, I will give the floor to Robin to walk us through some of those comments, perhaps, and really it's going to be a conversation among the board as to how you would like to proceed on this one.
Thank you.
So, as I shared yesterday, we have results of a survey that went out to about 65 people invited to take the survey. We had 31 people that went onto the website and took a look at the survey, and 15 responses. Of the responses that were entered into the survey system, when we asked if there were, if we had an advantage of going to a biennial budget, 9 said yes and 6 said no. And when we asked what the advantages were, the general consensus is that at this time, it's very difficult to estimate revenue given the COVID effect on the economy, and that makes it difficult to project what we have to spend in 2 years. We asked if there were concerns about preparing a biennial budget. 7 said yes, 8 said no. And when we asked what the concerns were, many of the responses were, again, very difficult to estimate revenue. But what kind of bubbled up is that there's really not an opportunity in a biennial cycle, the way we have designed it in the past, with a very narrow midterm, to ask for additional funding if revenue looks good. So that seemed to be the main concern going into a biennial budget. And we asked the respondents if there were any way to address their concerns without converting to an annual budget. And we had a lot of interesting ideas. Then yesterday, and here are the possible solutions that were offered. Make the second year of the budget advisory, make the midterm open, and by that I mean don't restrict it to only internal service updates, new grants, legislative changes. Instead, open it up to any type of budget request. Adjust personnel costs in the second year, because one of the concerns we heard in a session with the finance officers was that when the FTEs are not updated for the second year, that the budget for personnel costs and the actual personnel costs become, there creates a gap. So we should find a way to adjust personnel costs in the second year and find a process to do unanticipated receipts for grants. The unanticipated receipt concept addresses a concern about not being able to spend grants, but that concern applies to either a biennial or an annual budget. So it doesn't matter which way we go. That's something that we should be looking for a solution to. Yesterday, you had a meeting with elected officials, and the majority of the comments from the elected officials who were at that meeting was a stated preference for an annual budget. And one of the concerns that was expressed was that the current biennial cycle is on, it begins, we do the heavy lift for the biennial budget in a year when commissioners are up for re-election. Either one or two commissioners are on the ballot. There was a strong preference for an annual budget, and there is a preference that if you stay with the biennial process, that we shift it to begin on an even year instead of an odd year. So that is the feedback that you received from the survey. I would like to address a few things that were raised yesterday. The first is in regard to the survey itself. A comment was made that in order to take the survey, you had to enter your name, and that many people would not have replied to the survey because they could not do so anonymously. And that, while the survey tool does ask for a name, it is optional. And in fact, of the 15 responses that I received, only one person put their name into the system. So if people wanted to respond anonymously, they could have done so. So that's one thing. Another thing that was brought up was the fact yesterday that I was not addressing a concern about capital project budgets and their impact to the general fund. So the reason that I didn't talk about capital projects yesterday is that the only two departments that have capital projects are central services and public works, and none of those projects are funded with general fund. So it didn't seem like a valuable use of time yesterday to talk to elected officials about the concerns of those two departments. So that's why we didn't talk about the capital projects. So I just wanted to address those two things that were raised. And now I'll just turn it over to you for questions, or turn it over to you.
I have several questions. I imagine my seatmates do, but they will probably ask the same questions I have. So go ahead, Commissioner Tymensor, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to, before we get into any discussion, I had a question that, since Robin's ticking through things that were raised. One of the things that came up from the prosecutor and the treasurer was why we don't do, they call it like a true 2-year appropriation. And I just wondered if there's any back, and I understood what they were saying, I guess, and I was wondering if there's anything you could fill in. I don't remember you responding to that in terms of why it was set up the way it's set up, or if there's pros or cons to doing what they suggested versus what we're doing now.
So there are a few reasons that you don't go to a true biennial budget, and I do understand what they're saying. They're saying instead of here's how much for year one, here's how much for year two, instead just say, you know, let's say for a moment that an office or department had $1 million in each year, And instead of doing that, you just give them $2 billion for both years. So there are a few reasons that the county didn't do that. The first, again, was we have to close the fiscal year. Whether you have a 2-year budget or not, we have to close the fiscal year. And we wouldn't know how much was available for the second year until the first year was closed. And that doesn't happen until March or April. So you're pretty well into the second year before you know what you really spent in year one. That creates some challenges, both for financial reporting and for management of a budget. We're also required to update certain things annually. The state auditor requires that we update internal services on an annual basis. So it would be difficult to do that with a true 2-year budget. We're required to do a midterm adjustment in state law. That I can see where you might be able to do that with a 2-year, but really it would be superfluous. There were also challenges in the system, and I will be the first person to say that we cannot let a system drive our process. We need a system that supports our processes, not dictates them to us. So when I tell you that there are system challenges, there tend to be kind of significant. And our challenge is Munis. Munis, well, even when we were looking at using the budget components in Munis for a biennial budget, they told us that it would support a biennial budget, but it really doesn't. So those are just a few things off the top that make what's called a true biennium budget challenging. I spent many years at the state of Washington, and even at the state, what you see is that the general fund is appropriated by fiscal year. Other funds are often noted for 2 years, but even those are adjusted in the one and only supplemental budget that the state does each year.
Thank you. Yeah, that was all I had in terms of questions, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Gary, do you have anything up front?
Yes, I do. First of all, I really think that I'm going to give more weight to what the elected officials wanted rather than our staff, because of all those in the survey, the majority of them were staff from the county that are departments and their folks that work with that. So I kind of agree with what the assessor said about, who's this really affect? And these folks that work for us probably are going to reflect, what we want more than maybe what they want. I don't know that. It's just a perception issue, and I don't care much about the anonymous portion of it, to be honest with you. But I do think that our elected officials should carry the most weight in this decision. So that's kind of where I'm at on this issue.
Okay. I have, yesterday was an eye-opener listening to the electeds and their perceptions, because they wanted annual, biannual, and maybe a second-year advisory and such, and avoiding the perception of moving to an off-year election to avoid the perception of pressures on commission or commissioners. So with that in mind, it seems to me if we move to an annual budget, you're not avoiding an off-year election year. You're going to hit it. You're going to hit that no matter what. And even moving to a biennium budget, every other year, you're still going to hit someone in an election cycle. And so where I believe there is the perception where the commissioner may have pressures put upon them to vote certain ways, that I don't want to demean any commissioner in making the right ethical decision for the county budget, not based on election. But the perception still remains. But I'm not sure how we get rid of that by either an annual or a biennium budget. I don't think that's avoidable. Is that, before I move on, is that factual? Is that correct? We would not avoid an election year. Ty?
Well, I just want to say, for one, I heard at least 3 arguments for why you wouldn't want it on an election year. One of them was what you identified, which is political influence or perception thereof. The second one was the workload issue. You've got a commissioner trying to campaign at the same time as trying to do the heavy lifting of building the budget. And the third one was having a new commissioner, or probably more seriously, a new elected, like a new auditor or a new treasurer or a new prosecutor, locked into 2 years of a budget that they had no influence in putting together. So they'd be halfway through their term before they even got to weigh in on what their budget ought to look like. So those are the 3 reasons. And my understanding was that if you did 1 year, or my understanding of what they were arguing is that if you did 1 year of annual and then reset the biennial, you would have an alleviation of that to some degree. So I'm not sure what you're missing there, but if you had just annual for 2021 and then you built a 2-year budget, then it would be on a 2. I didn't even ever think of that, because I figured there was some state law or some reason why we were locked into the 2 years, like we had to track the state, or we had to, but it sounded like it was purely up to us, which 2 years we chose. So that was just an extra piece onto the whole thing that I just learned about yesterday. And I agree with you, Mr. Chair, that was the best elected officials meeting by order of magnitude that we've ever had. It was, everybody's comments were on point and really useful and helpful, and understand. They all had sort of a slight different nuance to where they were coming from. So I found that very, very useful.
Well, that leads to my second question, and that is, ideally, Robin, or whomever that lives in this world, ideally, if we were to make a change to an annual for 1 year, or whatever the change would be, when would we have done that or started that? Because here we are now in the end of August almost.
Well, ideally, you would have made a decision to go to annual budget back in February or March, when we could have had time to make changes to the system, write the instructions, change the reports. But that's, a date long past. So if the board should choose to go to an annual budget, we'll find a way. It's just going to look very odd. The book itself will look very odd.
So I remember you saying, Robin, yesterday, I believe I did, that to change to an annual budget with Munis and everything, all the other rigmarole that goes with that, it would cost about $50,000 to make that change.
That is our estimate of what it'll cost to redo the reports out of Questica. Questica is the big challenge. Right, okay. Because Munis still doesn't reflect a biennial budget. You only get to put in the most current year into the accounting system. But our budget system, Questica, the reports that we had designed when we stood the system up are all biennial reports. So
I get that, that's a raw number, but to do that just to change to an annual, and then if we were going to go to an off year and create a biennium, how much does that cost to reconvert again?
Well, we'd already have the reports canned.
Okay.
So it'll be pretty much a one-time cost of changing the reports, although I'm going to look to make sure Denise is nodding that it's a reasonable assumption.
Okay, good, thank you. Then I'll save my last question for last. Gary, have anything else?
No, I think I'm ready.
And Ty, you have anything else? Questions or comments?
No, I'm just looking over my notes from yesterday. I mean, it was, as I tallied it up, it was, obviously it's our decision, but since Commissioner Edwards made the point that the elected's, point of view weighs heavily, I mean, it was 6 elected officials that preferred to do an annual for 2021. I think Jeff Gabman was the only one who didn't, and he said, but he did want to, he was, saw the value of shifting the biennial cycle over by a year. But I had the prosecutor, the sheriff, the auditor, the assessor, the clerk, and the coroner all seem to kind of want the same thing and for the same reasons with slight nuances. So.
Well, since you brought that up, and I don't know if you have the answer, Robin, of the electeds that participated yesterday in that robust discussion, did they submit survey results?
I can't tell you, Commissioner. I
Oh, they
know
didn't put names.
they were the results, except for one. I know
You're
one
right.
person put his name in, but the rest were anonymous. So I don't
Okay.
know how many were from elected offices. I can tell you that Heidi Thompson from the sheriff's office was one of the respondents, and I know that because she said so. I don't know who submitted
fine.
the other responses.
Because I didn't know if we were compounding the number, but you're right, it was anonymous, all but one. So, like Ty said, what Jeff Gabman had to say, the treasurer, carries a lot of weight with me. Not that the others don't, but there was a lot of tremendous amount of input. Well, my question for you is, what is, and I think I asked this yesterday, whether this be the industry standards of biennium, and I think you addressed that yesterday as well. But what would you and or your staff be recommending? We're going to decide, but what do you recommend? Biennium or an advisory year, or there's problems with that? Or just move to an annual?
So my recommendation is mainly based on timing and workload. And it would be easier for budget staff to stick with the biennial process with the second advisory year. But as I said, we will make work whatever you decide.
Okay.
That is not my only reason for advising a biennial budget, but at this point, you've already heard what we have to say. So,
well, timing and workload are important, and to a lesser extent, the cost. That's just one-time cost, and that's really $50,000 is insignificant when you're talking about this, in my opinion. So that begs the question: then, what would the commissioners like to do? Go ahead, Ty.
All right, so I definitely want to stay for the long term on a biennial budget, but I went into yesterday's meeting thinking that because of timing and whatnot, that the advisory year might be the best option at this particular point in time. But then when you add in, and it wasn't just the elected officials, poll that matters to me, but what I didn't know prior to yesterday's meeting was the opportunity and value of being able to kind of do two things at once and reset the cycle staggered from the election cycle. So when you factor that opportunity in, and I think I've been clear from the beginning that I really felt like the COVID crisis and the absolute uncertainty with revenue projection that this board has struggled with throughout the whole, crisis, lent itself to an annual budget for next year. So when you put all that together, I'm I'm now strongly feeling that it should be an annual budget for next year and then a biennial budget going forward.
Gary?
I'm going to have to agree with Ty on the annual budget portion of it, but because we are entering a new reality with this COVID, I don't want to make a declaration that it automatically switches back after 2021, because we don't know what's coming with all this. We've got a lot of national issues, and we've got the COVID thing that we don't know where that's going. So I guess I've been told right along by management here that we can make adjustments, even though we create an ordinance, for an example. We can make adjustments to that ordinance as we go along, if need be. So I'm just going to vote for the annual for now and see what the future brings, and we can discuss that, or a new board maybe can discuss that with staff and see how all that fits. But I'm going to give deference to the elected officials that seem to basically, even Jeff recognizing that annual at this point might be better, and do a switch off year, election year or what, because Commissioner Hutchings, I agree with you. We can't hardly get away from somebody's going to be up for election at some point in time, no matter what we do. So I'm going to go for the annual.
But having said that, that you can't get away from the political piece of this when it's an off year, or whether it's an on-year election or not year. And I don't want to demean or diminish the capability or decision-making or integrity of any elected official, whether he or she's up for office or not in a budget year. It's a perception, but I'm going to give deference to the stand-up work ethic of an elected official. And by that, I'm going to lead right into the fact that our office directors, our department directors, and or department financial staff are not elected. I don't want to diminish that either, saying their input is less valuable than the elected's opinion, because they deal with this world all the time. And they're going to be very much stand up and not just yes men and women. They're going to say what they need to say, in my opinion, and I want to value their judgment as well. So with that, I'm going to lean also towards the annual for next year, because of we have not a clue which way we're going to be going at this point. And it will come up to a new board decision, but I would recommend going from an annual next year to a biennium. But that won't be my decision to make. That'll be a decision of the board then at that point in time, unless I need to make the decision this year, what's going to happen in 2 years.
No, you would,
No.
what we'll do to convert is you will adopt a resolution that converts to an annual budget. And that's all. And
And that's
then
it.
if you should choose as a board next year to return to biennial, then we'll do a resolution then to convert to biennium, preferably very early in the year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're going to go we'll do the annual for next year then, is the decision of the board currently, and we'll do a resolution to that effect. Go ahead, Ty.
I was going to say, like, respecting Commissioner Edwards' position of not, wanting to make that call now, but I would ask, hopefully we can agree that staff brings this to us at the earliest appropriate moment for consideration, so that if we're going to do biennial, we, don't put any additional scheduling burden that's not necessary. I mean, we may be in a position of not knowing, but I'd like to just have that discussed, whether it's February, as you say, whatever the right time is.
So we'll start the discussion on January 2nd.
Okay.
Yeah.
And perhaps with a survey, you'll know more in January than you do today. But a survey, and let everybody know it's anonymous. Don't be afraid to fill out the survey. Tell us what you think. And tell the board what you think. Do you need anything else, Robin?
Nope.
Wow. Yeah.
I would just like to jump in there that some of the elected officials felt the need maybe to postpone even after the 2021 budget and it sounded like they wanted to go biennial in the 2023 budget. It sounded like that was part of their reasoning. So I don't know how that's all going to fit. We don't know who's going to be here when as this moves forward, but I would like to say that, I mean, we've been talking about this for quite a while, but when we decide we're going to start talking about what we're going to do again in future years, I would like to have more deference put with the elected officials at that point in time than with our staff, only because our staff works directly for the management here and more than likely is going to reflect the views of their bosses. And so I feel strongly that we need to respect those elected officials, whomever they are, in whatever offices, and give them just a little more weight, because I'm the only one amongst the three of us that have held one of those positions and dealt with this type of activity. And I don't want to stampede the elected officials by putting as much weight on our staff, because we've got more staff in total than they do, if you wanted to add up the votes with the 51 or whatever it was. That's my concern as we move forward, that we truly respect the other elected officials.
Well, I don't think anybody's disrespecting them, but you have what you need, Robin?
I do.
So Olivia, Denise, Patty, thank you for your contributions, silently, and Sally Forth. And Romero, do you want to wrap this up?
Yes, we'll just bring a new resolution for your consideration shortly.
Okay, thank you. Then this briefing is done. We'll see you at the next one.